very exciting bit of the morning, which is to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Randy Swearer. Oh, who's sitting over here. Randy Swearer has been Provost at Philadelphia University since 2009, having previously been Dean of Parsons New School of Design in New York City, and prior to that, a tenured faculty member at the Design Division of the University of Texas College of Fine Arts, where he led on curriculum development. Randy Swearer has developed considerable expertise and has gained a formidable reputation in transformative institutional planning processes and in innovation in higher education. He has driven change at a diverse group of institutions by introducing integrative planning frameworks, raising funds for new facilities, implementing rigorous review processes, and fostering cultures of innovation, all topics on which he has presented widely. Randy's theme for today, how universities and colleges can navigate through turbulent times and actually harness that turbulence to drive innovation, is particularly apt for all of us today, because it does feel, and maybe it has ever been thus, but it does feel like we're in very turbulent times. And so we're absolutely delighted to welcome Randy to talk to us on surfing the tsunami, change and innovation during a period of turbulence. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here. I can't see any of you, by the way. These lights are so bright, but it's wonderful to be here. I want to thank my hosts. This is my first time in Scotland, I'm embarrassed to say, coming back in 2 weeks for a long, long vacation, but my 4 days here so far have really been wonderful. I'm wanting to talk today, by the way, we're having a little bit of problem with the monitor down here, so I'm going to have to turn around, instead of looking at the monitor, turn around and look at the screen. Wanted to talk a little bit today, that's me, about, to start off, just sort of frame what the presentation is going to be about. We're going to start here with the imperative for transformative change in not American, but in higher education in general. I think really on both sides of the Atlantic right now, we're all experiencing tectonic changes, really. This sense that the model is really morphing and changing in ways that we really couldn't have even anticipated 10 years ago. The second part of the presentation will be about the role of design thinking in facilitating change. Now, I'm going to use design thinking one more time in this presentation, and we can talk about it a little bit more as we move forward, but I've changed the terminology later in the presentation to generative planning, which maybe isn't any better. But design thinking, I think, is very, very confusing to a lot of people. So we're going to change design thinking into generative planning. And then I'll talk, the third piece of the presentation is about using my university, where I'm provost, as a case study to look at how we've been using generative planning as a way of transforming the university. I should mention here that this is very much a work in progress. I almost hate to use us as a case study because we still have a long way to go. But we've tried a number of things, and I want the rest of the higher education community to learn from our mistakes and from some of our successes as well. I should also mention, of course, that most of my familiarity is with American higher ed. I am broadly familiar with changes on this side of the Atlantic and the higher education system. But you might have to do some extrapolation from some of the things I'm talking about to some of the things that you're experiencing, but I'm sure you're more than capable of doing that. Before I move forward, I wanted to have Father Guido here give you a 3.5-minute period, if you will, of the traditional normative university that I'll be talking about in a moment. Could we start the video? Well, obviously he's doing a parody, but the I hope. But the normative university to which he's kind of referring, and the parody the university he's doing the parody of, really has its roots that go back to the medieval era, and you can kind of see some of the characteristics here of that traditional model: unidirectional delivery, right, from the teacher to the student, concentrated authority in that professor, spatially fixed knowledge access, meaning that the university is rooted in the soil. The library at the center of the university is rooted there, and the university is built around it. You're learning by memorization and ritualization, and a super long shelf life for knowledge. In fact, back in the medieval era, since much of the knowledge was religiously based, the shelf life for the knowledge was sort of eternal in a way. What do we got? Next, hold it. There we go. Things have really changed today. You can see that the accelerating mobility here of political concepts, ideas, goods, people, and capital. This is just unthinkable. Even the rate of change is unthinkable, even to what we had seen 15, 20, 30 years ago. And a lot of these changes, they just imply radical differences in universities. You can see that the traditional disciplinary basis of universities really can't address many of the problems that we're beginning to face today. The global systems and the massively networked world we lived in, these are not really conditions that the normative university was built to address. So global systems with staggering complexity, they generate problems with this confounding ambiguity. And this is really the challenge that universities face today. How do we create graduates who can confront incredibly complex, systemic problems like the ones our graduates are facing? And a couple examples, there are so many, but a couple that are really near and dear to our hearts right now, is systemic economic fragility. We're having problems with this on both sides of the Atlantic. Our endowment at our university in the United States, in 2008, it dropped by about 30%. Savings were wiped out by so many Americans on this side of the Atlantic. You have experienced much of what we experience. Markets are changing, technologies are changing, capital is so fluid. It is a different world, and we need to be preparing students to address this world. And climate change, one of the interesting things that I do as Provost of Philadelphia University, it's very odd. I get up at 4 in the morning and I call snow days. So this hasn't been a problem the last couple of years. There has been no snow in Philadelphia, which is highly, highly unusual. But again, these problems are so big, they're so massively networked, they're so systemic, and it takes a different kind of sort of cognitive habit on the part of graduates to be able to get their collective arms around them and address them. Now, the emerging model here of what I'm going to call an unbundled university, it embraces the systemic nature of the problems. And it does this by organizing itself around problem-based, transdisciplinary teaching and learning. And it explicitly builds curricula around collaborative learning experiences and positions itself as a hub in a network of knowledge sources. Now, why is the term unbundled so, in my view, appropriate right now for where we are? Unbundled, the traditional model of higher education had a certain group of logics that cohered it together. And that model is weakening. And as that model weakens, much of the bits and pieces that were cohered together under that model, they become disaggregated. We'll look at this more in a moment, but one of the big themes that I'm seeing emerging in higher ed today is this idea of disaggregation of services, disaggregation of learning, disaggregation of credentialing, disaggregation of information, and thank you. Let's catch up here for a second. We had, as I said, a problem with the monitor, so. And so, And the unbundled university leverages this fact that knowledge is a commodity, content delivery is no longer the major role of the university, and the value it adds is about teaching students to critically evaluate information, synthesize it into knowledge, and apply it to specific contexts that are often very complex and ambiguous. Okay. The unbundled university differentiates itself by bringing unique added value beyond delivering content. I'm going to beat a dead horse here for a moment. The idea of knowledge being a commodity is really central to this model that's emerging. So, put really simply, you take the university experience overall, you subtract commoditized knowledge from it, and what's left over is the added value that the university is bringing to the students. Now, not even so long ago, even today, that content delivery was one of the major things that we did. And that is changing radically, and we need to adapt to that. Now, I was at, a few weeks ago, about a month ago, I was at a conference or a symposium at the University of Pennsylvania. Daphne Kohler was there. She's the co-founder of Coursera. Of course, one of the big MOOC providers, in fact, the first big MOOC provider. And someone asked her at some point, should we be threatened by MOOCs? And she kind of calmly responded, the only institutions really that should be threatened by MOOCs are those that specialize in content delivery. And it kind of sent, I think, shivers through the room in a way, because the room is full of leaders of colleges and universities and administrators, and really much of what we do is still about that content delivery. Now, you might say, oh, MOOCs, not really a threat to anybody, and I agree with that, by the way. In their current form, I think MOOCs are very, very immature. There's a lot of growth and expansion and evolution that still has to occur with MOOCs. But fundamentally, they are effective in some instances. I was talking with Al Filreis, who also teaches at the University of Pennsylvania. He taught a MOOC about poetry, interpreting poetry, to 35,000 students. Now, a fraction of them finished the MOOC, of course, but it was still in the thousands. Now, I asked Phil, how was that teaching experience? And this is a man who has won nearly every teaching award at the University of Pennsylvania. And Al said it was the best teaching experience he had ever had. He felt the students who persisted through the MOOC got the most out of the course that any of the students had ever gotten with even in the face-to-face versions. He said he learned more about teaching, he learned more about pedagogy, he learned more about working with his teaching assistants. He said it was, in fact, so extraordinary that another MOOC teacher at the University of Pennsylvania gets together with him now for lunch, and they have kind of a MOOC recovery program because it's such a powerful experience for the instructor, and it's such a growing experience for the instructor that when you stop doing it, you feel like you're in some sort of withdrawal. Now, when you take, again, this issue of commodified knowledge, when you take away commodified knowledge or content delivery as the primary thing that universities do, what do you have left? This guy, Tony Wagner, you can't see the reference down here, though, unfortunately, I think because I have a Mac, it got cut off. But I really encourage you to see Tony's talk. You can go on YouTube. It's a fantastic talk. Well, Passion, Purpose, Play is what it's called. And what he says in that terrific little video is it's not what you know, but what you can do with what you know. And I would contend that a big part of the added value of the unbundled university is not about knowledge. It's not about content. It's about student agency. It's about teaching students to go out there in the world, synthesize what they've learned, and apply it to particular contexts. That's the high-level added value, I believe, or major part of the added value that the unbundled university is going to bring to the world. There's an emerging, bring all this together, and is an emerging model out there. Many of you are familiar, I think, with many of these pieces. Multi-directional delivery, very different than Father Guido's university. Multi-directional delivery, in other words, there are many different sources of information that the students are choosing from, and the classroom is very porous. Distributed authority, the teacher is now sort of chairing or mentoring the students. Distributed knowledge access, again, students are going to go to MOOCs, they're going to go to Khan Academy, they're going to go to Atomic Learning, they're going to go anywhere they want to go to get the information that they need. So what they need to know is how to access information and evaluate the information. Active collaborative learning. The problems are too big that we're facing today for one brain to get its collective arm, to get its to spread itself around a single problem. You need a collective brain working together. So collaborative learning, we've heard a lot about that in recent years, but I cannot emphasize enough how important it is. It can't be something also that we do simply by putting students in a room and having them work together, and then when it doesn't work, and they all yell at each other, and the collaboration isn't as strong as we thought it would be, we say, oh, it was good for them. You know, they learned how to work together. They learned how to get through conflict. No, you need to teach them explicitly how to work together, about working styles, about leadership styles, about how to get along with people who think differently than you do. But it needs to be explicitly taught and then reinforced, spiraled through the entire curriculum. And problem focused. So less discipline focused than problem focused. So there's a kind of transdisciplinary aspect to this. Okay, so I'm going to shift a little bit here. That is really a big question mark. I'm going to shift a little bit here. One of the things that really strikes me when I travel to conferences and I go to the Provost Roundtable down in Washington is how my colleagues, I was talking to somebody out here in the reception about it, how my colleagues oftentimes just seem kind of oblivious in a way to the revolution that's taking place out there. I mean, there is truly a revolution in the model of higher ed. And yet, so many academic leaders really seem kind of oblivious to it. They don't know what to do. They're trying to kind of figure it out, and there's a tsunami, I see, that's sort of rolling over at least the United States right now. And there's very little sense of how to deal with it. And I would say, no one really knows. But we need to start experimenting. We need to start thinking about what the unbundled university is all about. And, you know, when you think about unbundling for a moment, I said the normative model of the traditional university cohered it together, brought the various pieces together. And now there's this process of disaggregation that's going on in so many levels, right? But I wouldn't say that process of disaggregation or the unbundled university is a model. It's a process. And it will continue to drive change in higher education. But we need to develop a new model that bundles these pieces back together again in some sort of coherent form that makes sense for conditions that are emerging today. So we had a bundled university, it's unbundling, now we need to invent a model through experimentation that puts it all back together again. And I don't have the answers for that, but we're trying, we're experimenting. Now, I'm shifting a little bit here. I'm going to talk about some frameworks for change. I've tried to sketch in the broadest possible terms some of the tectonic shifts that are going on in higher education. Now, as I shift into looking at Philadelphia University, I want to look at planning methodologies for a moment. Traditional planning it uses clearly defined categories. And by categories, I mean, things like departments and faculty appointments and credits and schedules and all that kind of thing. And yes, we all have to work within that framework sometimes. But I'll show you in a minute, generative planning looks at that a little bit differently. It assumes that rational analysis is going to reveal a clear set of superior options that come from those categories. So we're assuming, in traditional planning, you're assuming a group of categories, and then you're trying to kind of reveal the best options that are coming out of those categories. And it tends to sort of objectify people and categorize them by functional grouping. So we're looking at professors, and we're looking at staff, and we're looking at students, but we're not looking at the individuals and the behavior of individuals that make up that group. And it assumes that the environment is relatively knowable and relatively stable. And of course, today, this is just not the case. There's radical change going on out there. There's turbulence and dynamism everywhere. Planning must take that into account. It's a very, very different way of looking at how to move change forward. Generative planning, again, my substitution for design thinking, looks at creating new categories. In other words, it's open to the possibility that the traditional categories that we operate in might not be the right categories. Maybe the credentialing system that we're currently working with needs to be changed. Maybe the credit system needs to be changed. And then it looks for incremental steps to get from here to there. It assumes that analysis and synthesis will provide opportunities to invent solutions. Because you're not relying on those traditional categories, you can't expect any optimal solutions to reveal themselves. You have to open yourself to the idea that new solutions will be invented. It's human-centered. It focuses on understanding human behavior and context. This is very, very important. So instead of looking at functional groups of people, professors, students, administrators, constituents, so on and so forth, you're really going out and you're observing. You're looking at how people really, really operate in their environment. By observing, I really mean that. I mean getting out there, collecting data through ethnographic research if you possibly can, or simple observational methods and weaving that together with other types of research, but really getting out there and observing behavior. And it assumes that the environment is knowable in certain respects, but it's dynamic and turbulent. In fact, that's kind of the basis of generative planning. There's change constantly. So the unbundled university is constantly asking questions about how it adds value. And this is important, it does this by reimagining and redesigning the system itself within which value is created. Very difficult thing to do. But when you're looking at creating a new model, you really have to look at the whole system, not just the categories within the system. Now, there we go. That's the building I work in at Philadelphia University. This is who we are. We're a relatively small university, 3,200 students, mostly undergraduates. We have strength in material sciences, competitive admissions, and a beautiful 40-acre campus. Now, you can just tell by kind of looking at this, we have a very kind of traditional-looking campus, very traditional university in some ways. And this is interesting because for many, many years, there was a tacit assumption. In other words, it was never fully articulated that the university was making decisions in order to become a comprehensive university, like Harvard or something. And I think in the United States, like almost every liberal arts college has this sort of Harvard thing going on. So what happened was, because that tacit assumption that we were becoming a comprehensive university was never really articulated, it could never be reframed. And what's interesting here is that through a strategic planning process, we were able to kind of reach beyond that tacit assumption to look at another tacit assumption. And that assumption was that we were very innovative, right? And innovation, as you all know, is the buzzword of the decade. It really means almost nothing, but there really was some reason that we would think of ourselves as innovative. It was historical, it was our relationship to industry and other nonprofits. It was the mix of disciplines that we had and how they worked together. But what I want to say is that we took this idea of innovation, a tacit sort of assumption about who we were, and in order to make it something that we could plan with, we reframed it as, in our strategic plan it says, we will achieve innovation by creating a college of design, engineering, and commerce. So that tacit attribute becomes what I call a planning artifact. And the planning artifact is really important because it's something that you can actually work with. The community can concretely respond to it and develop it over time and become much more aware of what innovation really means. And so we pursued it, and I'll show you a little bit. For the generative planning is all about co-creation, by the way, and we'll talk about this in a moment. But when you look at creating the College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce, when you create that planning artifact, you create something that you can begin to prototype. You can't prototype a tacit assumption, but you can prototype a planning artifact. So what we did with the college was use every possible opportunity we could to prototype it. We began with a series of workshops. And those workshops looked at huge issues like aging in place and sustainability. They were consciously transdisciplinary. And we brought together students and we brought together faculty from all different disciplines to attack the problem together in charrettes or intensive multi-day workshops. And what we were doing was prototyping processes about how the faculty would work together, how a curriculum might work, how classes might be taught. And we did that many times and continually iterated the process until it got better and better. So here's the college. That's the new building we just opened. And by the way, that building was part of the prototyping process, and from beginning to end, it was 18 months. We spoke to the architects, and then 18 months later, the building just was there in January. I just thought, oh my God, how did we do that? And I wanted to talk a moment about the college. So what the college does is it took 3 schools and put it together into one college. And after we did these collaborative exercises for a while and processes, we realized what we wanted to do was to create a coherent curriculum that would include 16 majors. So we have a core curriculum for 16 majors, based in part on the prototype processes that we had developed through those charrettes, or intensive workshops together. We also began to look at issues like appointments, and we began to look at issues of organizational structure, and began to prototype those as well. We diagrammed everything. And with prototyping, things need to be concrete. All right, so you have this planning artifact, but you need to get diagrams, you need to make models, you need things that people can respond to. And every opportunity that you can possibly find to prototype. And I should also mention that those 16 majors, that incorporated over half of the enrollment for the entire university. So there was a considerable risk here. We are tuition driven. And if the college didn't work, there would be no university. Now, we reframed a number of issues. As we developed past those initial charrettes, they began to give us some concept of how that core curriculum would come together. And as we put together the core curriculum, reframing concepts began to emerge. I'm going to show you one here. This is one small thing, but you can see how we prototyped it and we got responses to it from our colleagues around the country and internally, and we iterated it a number of times. But the idea here was to look at collaboration and specialization. Traditionally, you have, these are undergraduate students, by the way, 18 years old to 21, 22 years old. Traditionally, students start very broad and then they specialize. And you can see as they move through the freshman to the senior year. And what we saw was that we would then, closer to the senior year, we'd have these collaborative experiences that brought all those disciplines together, and they were project-based. And I think this is fairly typical throughout the world, actually. They graduate, and we have the traditional collaborative courses, and they'd all learn how to work together and be happy. In fact, most of the time, or much of the time, they hate each other. They don't know how to work together. You know, and then, as I said, we say, oh, that was good for them. They learned how to deal with conflict. So what we did is we reframed the whole issue here. We said, there are these gaps we've created through specialization. We've got to fill those gaps. You can't have those students only collaborating in their advanced courses. They need to start from the second they walk in the door and be explicitly taught about collaboration. Now, we were talking, of course, to industry. This is a professionally oriented college. So we were talking to industry. And it was interesting. They loved it. This is the traditional, again, they graduate, they specialize, they graduate. And this is the condition now. They're fairly specialized, and then the employers say, we have to train them to become broader. And this was so consistent across so many industries. And we check this out again and again and again. They say, well, they come in and all they can do is sort of these little service roles. There's kind of a glass ceiling they all hit. And so we teach them how to collaborate. And then if they really want to grow into leadership roles, they need to learn not only to collaborate, but they need to learn how to manage, become leaders in a collaborative context. So we love what you're doing. Now, that simple concept, specialization and collaboration, that pervades the entire curriculum for the college. And we, again, prototyped that and integrated it at so many levels throughout the curriculum. And I'll mention real quick here. The curriculum goes like this. It starts the freshman year with a course called Design Process and Integrative Thinking. It moves to a course in the junior year called Systems Thinking. Moves into a course in the later in the sophomore year or in the junior year called Business Models. It's a horrible name for the course. It's about how you create value in organizations, and that can be cultural value, political value, social value, and economic value. And another course in research methods, observational research methods. And then there's a capstone. And the majors then provide a lot of courses supporting the core throughout the experience of the students. As you're doing this, as you're moving through this prototyping process, and you're defining your planning artifacts, and you're making change happen, it only works if you're constantly assessing what you're doing. If you're prototyping, you need to have a way to get information back about the success or the failure of the prototypes that you're testing. So on a very specific level, you need to get information about a curriculum, or you need to get information about a building that you're building. But you also need to look broadly at the environment that you're operating in, and the overall community, if you will. And look at the qualitative as well as the quantitative, but in particular the qualitative aspect. So what we did here is we used a methodology called action research. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. Essentially going out into the field during a period of change and measuring longitudinally how people perceive the change based on a number of different parameters. So we were constantly going out, there were interviews going on, there were an instrument that was used, an instrument that's been well established. And we asked the community, do you think, for example, we're where we should be with ad hoc planning versus strategic planning? Do you think that we are too top-down, or are we sufficiently collaborative? And they would rate us, and we could see those bars sort of change over time. One bar indicates where they thought we should be, and another bar indicates where they thought we were. And fortunately, we did see change over time, but I wanted to tell you that the action research brought us to this place at a particular moment really interesting. I was sitting down with the president during snow days when nobody was there. So I called a snow day. That was 3 years ago. I called a snow day, and I called the president. I said, look, nobody's here. Let's come in and talk. We got a bunch of other people, and we kind of trudged through the snow. And we looked at the action research, and it revealed, really, if you looked at it, that the community was like, okay, we get this College of Design Engineering. We get it. We understand it. But we want to see it happen. We want it to be concrete. And we were losing momentum, we thought. We also thought that people knew much more about it. They thought they knew much more about it than they really did. There were some real gaps in understanding. So we made a decision. We were going to build the building now instead of in 1.5 or 2 years. So really, in the middle of the process of curriculum development, in the middle of the process of hiring new leadership, we launched the building campaign. And we did that because we wanted to use the building as a prototype. And it worked brilliantly. Of all the things we did, that was one of the best things we did. Because the process of building the building forced everybody to sit down, look at something concrete, begin to think through issues. How is the curriculum really going to work in here? How are we going to have faculty have their offices in here? Or is a discipline going to own a piece of it? How is this all going to work together? And through the iterations of the building plan, the overall structure of the college came together beautifully, I think in 6 or 7 months. And there was a nice play back and forth between the planning and the making of the building. It drove the architect into absolutely crazy. But it was a wonderful moment for us. So, generative planning. Tacit attribute, planning artifact, CDEC, by the way, the College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce. What we did then is, and this is important too, look for what I call prototyping chains throughout the process of generative planning. So if you can scaffold from one level of planning to another by completing one prototype project and then applying it to another project, you can really make progress quickly. What we did was to use the College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce, when it was done, to restructure the entire university into a system of colleges. It worked so well. It had an internal matrix, so there was lots of collaboration. We figured, why not just restructure the entire university into 3 colleges, have those colleges have parallel structures, and build a matrix, in other words, have functions that move laterally across all of the colleges, academic and support functions, as well as vertically. But the prototype was CDEC. So we redesigned the university structure, and one of the things we wanted to do was to create responsiveness and flexibility and integrate academic planning in the colleges. We reorganized those academic units into a matrix, and we built innovation into the shared governance system. Once we restructured the colleges, there were a number of support functions that necessarily had to happen. It's another thing, as you're prototyping, you have to think about what infrastructure do you need for the prototypes to be successful. So we worked for a year with faculty to redevelop the shared governance system, or the system that balances the relationship between the administration and the faculty. So innovation, CDEC, the college system. In a moment I'll talk more about the shared governance system. But the transformation imperative up there, the transformation imperative was very important to us because it was a series of events that we did over the course of a year, actually multi-years at this point. And what it did was it created a space for ongoing dialogue and discussion at the university. So when you're going through all this massive prototyping and change, you have to make sure that you're constantly trying to bring in great voices from the outside. Bring in people. As I said before, you can't expect yourself to have all the expertise from inside the model that you're trying to change. And so we continually brought in people from the outside to look at issues like distributed credentialing, MOOCs and online education, peer networks integrated into our curriculum. You can see this is my friend Benny Banerjee, he's director of the Stanford Change Labs, who was director of the D School. Institutional knowledge is just insufficient much of the time when you're doing generative planning. Find thought leaders, find the best people, bring them in. And really, one of the things it does is to create also a network that then helps drive change forward. We have a great network we've built out of the transformation imperative. And also look outside higher ed, really. Higher ed has a lot to offer, obviously, but when you're trying to change the model, there's a lot of other sectors that can contribute. I'll give you an example. There's a woman, Robin Chase, and she runs the biggest car sharing service in the United States. And she just started a new service called Buzzcar in France. And she gave a talk that I attended at the Business Innovation Factory last fall in Provost. And she had the most sensitive, nuanced take on the relationship between a peer network and what it provided and what an institution or a corporation, but it also could be a university, provided. And I just thought, wow, I need to bring her to the university. And she needs to talk about this concept. You can look this up too. She does YouTube and she does TED and all that. So Robin Chase. And she called it Peers Incorporated. So we brought her to campus, we did workshops with her, faculty worked with her, and we've begun to develop this new framework for integrating peer networks into the university. But she came from industry. The academic growth plan I mentioned briefly earlier, once we got the colleges together, again, we had to look at the kind of infrastructural support that we would need for the new college system. So in order for the prototype to be successful, it needed a way for us to academically weave it together. So we created something called the academic growth planning process. And what that does is it gets many of the faculty from across all of the university, so all of the disciplines, and they get together in a charrette or an intensive workshop over a multi-day period in the summer, and they look at our entire academic program, not just their area or one other area. They're looking at everything all at once, and they're asking, where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses, where could we add programs to bridge functions in order to strengthen an area, where can we address deficits, where are the opportunities for positive change that will drive together the colleges. This, I should mention, has been a great success. The faculty love doing it, and it's all transdisciplinary. And we have a number of frameworks we've developed over the years for the academic growth plan. The main framework is called ecosystems. And the ecosystems, really, they're not based on disciplines, they're based on sort of thematic clusters like sustainability. And we weave course pathways through the ecosystems. All right, so what did I do here? I put the same slide in twice. The transformation imperative in the academic growth plan, it came together to create those academic programs that then bound together the college system. The shared governance I mentioned earlier, we built into the shared governance system something called the curriculum innovation space. Now, so this is a faculty-led entity, but what it does is it takes concepts from the academic growth plan and incubates them. It brings together functions from across the university and a whole range of faculty and outside experts if we need to. The Provost office would pay for that. And it incubates concepts over time, over the course of the year, and that for launch in subsequent years. And again, it's also been, we just launched it last year, but it's been tremendous success. I think I've never seen anything like it, at least in American higher ed. And it seems to, it's very, very popular. Now, ending on a really hopeful, heavily Photoshopped note. We have a long way to go. I've spoken to you about all the things that we've done and the prototyping and the generative planning, and I am proud of what we've achieved, but we have so far to go. I'm less proud sort of what we've achieved, simply because in my head I know how far we have to go. But what I'm most proud of is that we're trying. We're experimenting. We're taking some risks. We're doing some new things. We're trying to reframe. That's really what I'm proud of. What is our next step? Our next step is to look less inwardly. We've just begun to, and I think really on this side of the Atlantic, there's much more going on with the Bologna process, and Erasmus and all that. The States really don't have any of that going on yet. We need to look much more externally for distributed peer networks, really trying to understand different models for our students interacting with other institutions, phoretic coordination, a lot of the things that you're dealing with right now. We have 4 different models or prototype models for partnerships that we're working on right now. One is for online. We launched 2 different prototypes. One has failed. We're going ahead with another one. And we're currently putting together several others as well that we'll evaluate over the course of the next year. So we've been very internal, and I think that's been appropriate. Now we have to turn outward and be very, very external. And I think actually that's existentially for us extremely important. I can't emphasize that enough. And I wish we could have gotten to that about a year ago, but the amount of change we were driving, just we didn't have the bandwidth. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. What a great way to open up our conference, just to kind of throw the whole model up for grabs. And it's fantastic to hear people actually doing kind of research on the job. I mean, researching the whole of higher education system. Have we got any questions for Andrew? We've got some time for questions. Please, there are microphones going around the room, people carrying microphones around the room, please just say your name and where you're from before you put your question to Andrew. Andy said, oh, there's a couple down there. It is actually very hard to see from here.
Indeed.
Yes, we've got 2.
Fine, thanks very much for that, Randy. Sheree Walker, University of Strathclyde. You mentioned something about an incubation process as part of your academic growth plan. I wondered if you could say a bit more about what that actually involves, and particularly how you get staff with existing teaching loads to engage in taking ideas forward.
Well, this is built into the fact that the beauty of this is that it's built, and the importance of it is that it's actually built into the shared governance system. So we're not giving course reductions or anything for this. It's a subcommittee, if you will. It's not a committee. It's structured slightly differently, but of a new part of the shared governance system, which would be like your curriculum committee at a normal university. It's called the Academic Oversight and Opportunities Committee. The Curriculum Innovation Space is a subunit of that. So the faculty involved in it are really doing their service and getting credit for their service by being on this subcommittee. And at our university, most of the full-time faculty really must serve in some way regularly in the shared governance system. But your point is very good in general. Because a lot of this stuff, like during the summer, you're asking faculty to come in when they could be doing research and doing the academic growth planning process. How do we do that? We pay modest stipends, and we give course releases over the course of the year if we need to do that. It's not a lot of money, though. It's not a lot of money. It's more of an honorarium. People do enjoy doing it. Does that answer your question? Sure.
Hi, thank you very much for this brilliant talk. I enjoyed it very much. My name is Ming, and I come from University of Glasgow. I'm interested in your comment on students taking initiative in the learning process. And you mentioned we should encourage students to synthesize what they learned in their real life. And I understand it as we should encourage students to become more active and more engaged in the learning process. And one of the observations from my research is that academics in UK tended to feel the pressure of giving more support, or in other words, spoon-feeding the students due to the culture of consumerism.
Yes.
And I just wonder And also they felt the pressure to be getting more good feedback from students. And I just wonder, could you suggest how to shift the culture of consumerism towards more interactive learning in university sector?
It's another terrific question. I mean, and you're right. I think there is this. I'm not sure exactly what conditions this passive consumer of education sort of thing that we find ourselves dealing with students so much. But I think the way to do it, and the way that we've decided to do it, you can see through the gap, through the specialization diagram and the collaboration diagram that we put together, is to grab them right away, right when they come into college. They're put in, at least in the college, which again is over half the enrollment in our university, those students are put immediately in a position from literally the first day of class in a position where they must be actively engaged in their education. They must be. And we're prototyping pedagogies that help them to do that. We're forcing them, for example, to get out into the community and identify opportunities to make improvements, either in services or wherever they want to make improvements, and then coming back and prototyping those. So they have to be involved. They have to be collaborative. They have to be interactive. And we're finding, so this is the second year of the DEC curriculum. And what we're finding is those students, this is anecdotal, we have an instrument, but we just don't have enough information yet that we use to measure at the end of each year. But what we're finding anecdotally is that these students are much more engaged. They're much, much less passive because they've been expected to be that way really from the moment that they walk in the door. And I think really, instead of reteaching them, that may be one of the only ways to do it, is to grab them right away when they come in. But it is one of the biggest challenges. It's one of the challenges that we all face when we're talking about engaged, project-based, collaborative learning. It's all about motivation, isn't it? It's all about the students really taking the initiative and getting in there. And that's one of the big challenges for us.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Yes.
Could you say a little bit about how shop was doing?
Yeah, why don't you wait for the mic so that everyone can...
Hi, thanks. Could you say a little bit more about the shared governance process and what it was before, how you changed it, and whether that had any impact, among other things, on percentage of full-time faculty versus adjunct faculty? Because in design programs, a lot of times, a lot of the faculty are adjunct faculty. So maybe you should talk about the ratio as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, within the design program, particularly in the School of Design and Engineering, on the design side, there are a tremendous amount of adjunct faculty. It hasn't changed the ratio right now. It's only been, last year was our first year of the new shared governance agreement. So everything I'm talking about is new. In the last 4 years, I've only been at Philadelphia University for 4 years. The shared governance before was much more, I think, a kind of oppositional. It wasn't really shared. It was really kind of the faculty wanting this and the administration wanting that. And then there was this implied negotiation that was supposed to occur. Since the faculty are only really making recommendations to the administration can kind of do what it wanted to do. What the new shared governance agreement does is it really tries to share power between the faculty and the administration. And the idea there is that the faculty is not fully engaged with changes at this level. They simply won't go along with them. And they won't lead them. They won't be part of the creative process of putting them together. We rely on the faculty to do that. And if we were in sort of a governance relationship that was more traditional, more sort of oppositional, where you're sort of negotiating power back and forth, I just don't think that would work very well. So we've created like a shared governance committee that has many, many more administrators and faculty on it. We create our agendas now together. There's much more interaction with the president and with me than there was before. That's mandated really through the shared governance system. Much more accountability to the administration, to us, and accountability of the faculty to the administration. And everybody is behind this idea of positive change and experimentation. The idea of putting a curriculum innovation space into a shared governance agreement is really unusual. But it sort of speaks to the fact that the faculty felt that this was something we had to do, it was important to do, and they wanted to make sure that they were front and center in doing it, which I completely applaud. So it has really changed the tenor, and it has changed the feeling of the relationship between us and between the faculty. There's much more of an integration than there used to be. Also, just remember, on a practical level, we had to change it because we didn't have schools anymore. We had 3 colleges, and the entire system was built around schools. Does that answer your question? Sure.
We could have several questions, but I won't ask them at this point. We'll draw this session to a close because you all have to get to your workshops and your whichever sessions, parallel sessions you're attending. Just to say, for those of you who are on Twitter, maybe you'd like to start tweeting about some of the things you've heard today. The tweet address is #ETconference13, so get on your phones and start tweeting. I'd like to thank Randy again for a really exciting and thought-provoking opening address from today. Enjoy your morning. Thank you.